I'm being told that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
P.A. Mulroy, can you please tell us what led to those aggravated kidnapping charges?
To explain it?
Yes, sir.
All right, I don't mind doing that. I mean, explaining the law is, I don't think at all.
What led to those charges?
Say it again?
Can you explain what led to
Yeah. So, all right. So, kidnapping is any unlawful confinement of another, which substantially restrains someone's liberty. At a certain point in the sequence of events, it is our view that this, if it was a legal detention to begin with, it certainly became illegal at a certain point, and it was an unlawful detention. The aggravated nature of the charge is because if that kidnapping resulted in bodily injury, that's one grounds for saying that it is aggravated kidnapping. If the persons involved in that unlawful restraint of liberty possessed weapons, that is another ground for saying that the kidnapping was aggravated. Do you want me to explain the other charges as well? Or? Okay. All right. Official misconduct is when any public official acting part of their official duties intentionally or knowingly acts in a way, exercises authority that is unauthorized by law. Right? So that's an affirmative statement, an affirmative act of official misconduct. At the same time, law enforcement officials who are on duty are also under an affirmative duty to prevent official misconduct and to accurately report information to any medical personnel that show up. And through inaction, when there is a duty imposed by law, that could also be a separate ground for charging official misconduct. Official oppression is a related statute. It's not exactly the same. There is some overlap, but it's not perfect overlap. But it is basically some sort of, by an official, knowing mistreatment in the course of carrying out their official duties. Aggravated assault, I think, is fairly obvious. And under the laws of Tennessee, second-degree murder is a knowing killing.
All right. Thank you.
How long is the video? Will it be redacted?
Well, reporters had a lot more questions to ask, but apparently D.A. Mulroy has had enough and he's walking away now. We just heard from Shelby County D.A. District Attorney and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation as well on these charges involving the Tyre Nichols death investigation case.
That's right. All 5 officers are charged with felony second-degree murder, aggravated assault act in concert, 2 aggravated kidnapping charges, 2 official misconduct, and 1 count of official oppression.
Now, we understand just within the past few minutes, Ben Crump, attorney for the family of Tyre Nichols, releasing a statement saying, and here it is, the news today from Memphis officials that these 5 officers are being held criminally accountable
And what is your reaction to that?
Well, those are very normal bond amounts for crimes of this severity. So it's not altogether surprising that those amounts are what they are. And yes, they can be made with the help of a bonding company, and I suspect that's pretty likely.
We have seen way too many cases like this. Officers using excessive force. We have videos. I mean, it just is a playbook, unfortunately, that we've seen too much of. But one thing I've seen in the commentary, the rolling commentary, not just here in Memphis, but also at the national level, with dealing with not only reporters, but other prosecutors who've dealt with this over and over again and weighed in. They have been struck by the speed of this investigation, as well as the severity of the charges, which you typically do not see in cases like this.
Yeah, in many cases, in fact, in Memphis, Tennessee, where police officers are accused of harming people, we have seen months and years, as Claiborne Ferguson said earlier, go by before there's any sort of response from the prosecution function. So to have these charges in hand so quickly is very, very unusual, and I think speaks to what this video is going to show, but it also speaks to this community's response and what this community has said in recent elections about who makes these decisions. And we have very different decisions being made in this instance.
That the charges seem to have come down pretty fast, but I know everyone feels like that video footage is taking quite a while. So is that common? I think in other cases we've seen that video footage come out pretty quickly, but in this case, not so much.
Well, I don't think this is unusual. I mean, that video is the primary evidence that the district attorney's office has been using, I suspect, to bring about these charges. And so they didn't want to risk spoiling any part of this prosecution by making that video public too soon. So I think that's part of it. And I think, again, in many communities, when we have these now, all too frequent videos, it can be months and sometimes even years, and it can take activists and the community speaking up and kind of almost finding out about videos before we see them. So in this case, we've known about the video from day one, and we're almost, or a little more than 2 weeks since this happened, and we're about to see it. And so I think it's relatively quick, and I think the responses so far have been different and better than in the past.
All right, well, Josh Spickler, I want to thank you for your time here. We'll probably come back to you later. And we do have Earl Fisher in the studio, too. We'll be going to him momentarily, but I understand you have a timeline here of
yes,
kind of how things unfolded.
Absolutely. So we all know that this arrest happened on January 7th. So let's break this all down, how we got here. According to Memphis police, Tyre Nichols was pulled over on January 7th for reckless driving near Rains and Ross Road. Now, according to MPD, 2 confrontations occurred with police after it was said Nichols fled. Now, it was during the second confrontation that resulted in Nichols' arrest. That's what police say. And Nichols said he was short of breath and an ambulance was called to the scene. Now, he was later transported to a nearby hospital in critical condition. Now, on January 10th, 3 days after his traffic stop, TBI announced Nichols had died due to his injuries. And more than a week later, on January 18th, the Department of Justice announced its civil rights investigation into Tyre Nichols' death.
On Friday, January 20th, Memphis police named and fired those 5 officers involved. On Monday, the 23rd, a preliminary autopsy report done by the family revealed Nichols' cause of death to be due to extensive bleeding caused by a severe beating. This happening the same day the family viewed the video, the terrible video by all accounts of that beating. And today, January 26th, nearly 3 weeks after that initial traffic stop in southeast Memphis, right near the Hickory Hill area, the 5 officers involved have been arrested and charged in the death of Tyre Nichols. All right, now I want to be joined by a Memphis activist, Pastor Earl Fisher. Pastor Fisher, we talk to you about these kinds of things way too often in my mind. I wonder if you had the same reaction as Mr. Spickler, that this is at least more in line with the kind of timing you would hope there would be in cases like this.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I share some of that same sentiment. Of course, our heart is with the family of Tyre Nichols, first and foremost, especially as a pastor and a community leader. We always want to try to center their experiences. I think there are some things that have developed up to this point that have been unusual, similar to what Brother Josh talked about. This is the byproduct of elections having consequences. Prior to this instance, when the previous district attorney was in office, there were several times where law enforcement officers were involved in brutality and even killing of civilians, some of whom were unarmed, and we never saw an indictment. So I think that there's something that we could say insofar as progress is concerned in that regard. However, I definitely long for the day where we aren't expected to run victory laps because we do the bare minimum insofar as simply charging officers who have not even been convicted yet and have been giving a bail that's set at a price that I think most of the citizens in Memphis, if they were engaged in similar behavior, would not have seen.
And I know we're long awaiting that video to come out. We heard DA Mulroy saying that that could happen tomorrow after 6 p.m. What would you have to say about the community's just outlash after they may see this video? You're an activist. What would you, how do you think that this will turn out?
Well, I appreciate DA Mulroy articulating that the city of Memphis is the primary custodian, because I think there have been some discussions about who would be ultimately responsible for releasing that. I'm not sure it's a wise decision to release it on a Friday evening, and I'm pretty sure that the city, the mayor's office and some of the people in MPD might do their job to articulate that. I do think it's conspicuous that Chief Davis was not at the press conference when these charges were announced. At the end of the day, history has shown us it has not ever been the escalation of activists in Memphis and Shelby County in the protest demonstrations. I think without fail, you've seen poise and passion from protesters that have not been exhibited by law enforcement. So I'm hopeful that as people demonstrate their fundamental and First Amendment right, that they will be honored as such, and that law enforcement and other entities who are a part of these things will be able to govern themselves accordingly.
I got to ask you, when you look at the larger issues here, not just involving these 5 officers, don't you think this really exposes some weaknesses in terms of how we're training our officers? I was struck by the fact that all 5 of these former cops had been on the force for less than 6 years. To me, there are a lot of larger issues here that we really need to explore.
I agree with you, Brother Richard. There are some particulars insofar as what's happening with Tyre Nichols' case, and of course we want to honor the nuances relative there, but we are dealing with systems and structures of injustice and inequity, and we've been in similar situations over the last several years. Many of the activists and organizers, community leaders and faith leaders have been trying to articulate the need for substantial criminal justice reform. It's been demonized by people who are in positions of authority, and they've tried to diminish some of the impact of it. They've tried to end around some of us in terms of conversation. I think this is a byproduct of that. I would be remiss if I did not say, there are people in positions of power and authority that definitely need to be held accountable for inactivity and insensitivity over the last several years. This is not an isolated incident. 9 times out of 10, this is not either of these officers' first rodeo. You really don't start off at this level of brutality. You probably graduate your way into it, and then we have to ask who should have been supervising them. If they only have 5 years on the force, that means they should not have the level of autonomy that would allow them to engage in these patterns and practices. Somebody should have been supervising them. And if that's the case, we need to know who and who should be held accountable for that as well.
They in fact have mentioned that there will probably be more officers who are at least disciplined, if not charged, as a result of what happened to Tyre Nichols. All right, thank you, Pastor Fisher, so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, minutes ago, the Shelby County District Attorney did wrap up that news conference, and we do have a brief recap from our Rebecca Butcher.
Let's go to her now live and tell us exactly what happened, Rebecca, now that this thing is over.
They need to come to me. I heard you tell them. I told them. We have to. No, we need to talk about that. So come to me about that at least.
Well, Richard Pepper, we did expect to hear from the MPD. That's Chief C.J. Davis. She was not here. Mulroy commented that he did not know why she was not present. We basically heard him lay out these charges and the reasons for them. Now, all 5 of these MPD officers have been charged with second-degree murder. We also know the family of Tyre Nichols, who died after a confrontation with 5 MPD officers. They were asking originally for a first-degree murder charge. However, that was not a charge that was included today in that indictment. We did ask him why that was not included. We didn't yet receive a response from that, but he also said that the kidnapping charge, aggravated kidnapping, he explained a little bit more of what that means. He laid out that what that included was that holding down or any type of restraint that might have been legal at one point later became not or illegal. We also too did hear from the FBI director. He was basically laying out this video. Of course, it's very emotional for people in Memphis who are waiting to see the video. He described the video as appalling, criminal, something that MPD is not proud of as well. Richard?
All right, Rebecca, thank you. Now, just like Rebecca mentioned, C.J. Davis was not at that press conference, and we are still working to figure out why she was not there to give her public response. But she did release a video last night around 10 o'clock giving her first really open response to this whole death investigation. We had not heard from her yet. So this was a note that what she said in that video.
It's not just a professional failing. This is a failing of basic humanity toward another individual. This incident was heinous, reckless, and inhumane. And in the vein of transparency, when the video is released in the coming days, you will see this for yourselves.
Yeah, and that's what we're all waiting for and not looking forward to, I might add, based on what we've heard from the people who have seen it. Right now, we're going to bring in some law enforcement perspective in all of this.
Absolutely. Former Shelby County Lieutenant with the Sheriff's Office joins us with a law enforcement perspective.
And Benny, when you first heard about the incident, I've got to ask, what was your first thought as an officer about how this might play out? And then as the case has evolved, your thoughts now?
Well, when I first heard about it, of course, you have complaints against officers every day. And I had no idea that it was as bad as it is for the first couple of days. And then when I heard the TBI had been called in, of course, it took me to a different perspective. Now, this is the actions of the officers and the investigation brings us to where we are today.
Absolutely, and one of those things that Chief Davis had mentioned in her video was that this was not this was not an accurate depiction of all the hard work that MPD officers do. But where do we go from here? How does MPD combat this stigma that they might get about, being an unlawful department? Well,
so I come from two perspectives. As a father, as a grandfather, and as an uncle, I'm certainly concerned about the me and my family. Now, as a law enforcement officer, former law enforcement officer, retired now, they spent over 40 years in public safety and worked in every aspect of law enforcement. This incident is unfortunate as it is. The Memphis Police Department needs to absolutely open their books, open their doors, open their windows, and have transparency to the citizens where there's no doubt in their mind that the police department is actually working on the behalf of the citizens.
Of course, it's not lost on anyone that not only was the suspect black in this case, but now all of the officers involved too. And I was struck by a comment that was made by the Crump team at the news conference earlier this week when they said, we're not anti-white cop, we're anti-bad cop. Mm-hmm. I think there was an important distinction. I wonder what your thoughts are, because race always seems to play into this.
Absolutely, and in most cases in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis and in Tennessee. However, race is always a big factor. It should not be, but the reality of it is that it is. Now, I'm on record as saying I am pro-police. I absolutely love good, effective, honest police work. And when there are bad actors, those bad actors should be held accountable. The actions should be swift, certain, and severe. And I think that's where we are today. In my career, I've not seen any actions against police officers that's taken this swiftly and this certain and this severe. And the actions of those officers call for this. While I'm on that subject, there's no amount of prayers or actions right now that can bring back Tyre Nichols. His family is suffering, and so my prayers go out to his family, and also that the citizens of Memphis will let the justice take its course.
And I got to have you weigh in on the fact that there is all this video. We're told an hour's worth of video that will probably be edited down somewhat. But the difference that has made, not only in this case, but so many others, in exposing wrongful behavior on behalf of law enforcement, it really has changed the game, hasn't it?
Well, now, there's been video before. Rodney King, for example, and several other instances where there's been video. I think that the thing that happens here in Memphis has really evolved here lately, maybe because of the George Floyd incident or maybe because of some other incidents. But we're at a point now where the video is being taken seriously. I would hope that whatever editing that's going to be done for sensitive reasons, that people will understand that it's necessary. We're where we are today because of the video and because there were people that were out demanding to see it and demand some action be taken.
Couldn't agree more. All right, thank you, law enforcement expert Benny Cobb. We appreciate you being with us.
Well, as we near the end of our breaking news coverage, the Nichols family continues calling for justice and patience for everyone waiting for the video release.
They're not going down without a fight. You know, and we need justice. We need them to be charged with murder one. No involuntary manslaughter, none of that BS. No murder two, no murder three, none of that. Murder one.
So, as you heard him say, he demanded murder one. Those were not the charges that were issued today, and we're probably getting some reaction from him. It is kind of, you get into kind of the trivial, differences between the charges, but they're also very important differences. So you have to try and prosecutors also have to think about, well, what am I going to get a jury to convict these officers on? And maybe they felt first degree was too much of a stretch. Looking ahead now, family and friends of Tyre Nichols will say their final goodbyes on Wednesday. His funeral will be held at the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. That's on North Bellevue, and it will be at 10:30 that morning. Reverend Al Sharpton will be delivering the eulogy.
And also tonight, there will be a candlelight vigil at Toby Skate Park at 7 p.m. for anybody who'd like to share their condolences or pay their respects there too. Now, before we go, we just want you to know that we are monitoring the release of the video used in Tyre's death investigation. Now, ABC 24 will make sure to be responsible in the footage that we show. So when the video is released to the public, ABC 24 will not put it out immediately. Richard, we want to make sure we provide enough context for you before we show that video blindly. And with it being such a sensitive and traumatizing time for some people, we want to be sure that we only show what is absolutely necessary to tell the facts.
And in the meantime, let's not forget, there was an individual involved here. As we talk a lot about the officers now and what charges they face, Tyre Nichols, by all accounts, was a good guy, a proud father, a hard worker.
An avid skateboarder.
Yeah, skateboarder too. We've been showing that video. A hard worker for FedEx, just had a lot of things that were endearing to him, and it's just still confounds all of us who have been watching this play out. What on earth was it that caused 5 officers to lose it like they did? In the meantime, we'll be keeping you updated on abc24.com and on the ABC 24 app.
Thank you for sticking around with us through breaking news coverage. We will now return to regular programming.